I hope everybody had a chance to sign in early and get any technical problems worked out. If you're still experiencing any problems, write us a note in the chat box and we'll see if we can assist you. For folks that couldn't attend today, this webinar is being recorded and a PDF will also be sent out. So everybody has been muted, so you should only be able to hear myself and Nick. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the chat box in the right-hand column of your screen. Nick will be taking some time at the end of the presentation to discuss questions, if there's enough time to do so. Please add a question mark at the end of your question, as this program recognizes and separates questions for us. Thank you. If we run out of time to address all of your questions, we will send out the questions and answers by email. To begin with, we'd like to find out who's here and where you all work, or what your areas of interest are. If you haven't already, can you all please type in your name and workplace or your area of interest in the chat box? And we can review these while I'm introducing Nick. Thank you. All right. Well, at this point, I'm pleased to give a warm welcome and introduction to Nick Wong, who's the Research and Projects Coordinator with the Invasive Species Council of BC. Nick received his BSc from Western University and a Master's of Science and a PhD in Marine Ecology from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Nick is passionate about teaching and creating engaging opportunities for people to learn and understand the role they can play in the prevention and management of invasive species. Today, the presentation will focus on how you can make a difference in your community by tackling invasive species and protecting BC's amazing biodiversity, or variety of living things. We are the most biodiverse province in Canada, as tens of thousands of species make their home here. Part of Nick's role focuses on educating and informing a diverse range of audiences on invasive species introduction and spread in BC. Nick will define what makes a non-native species invasive, present some species to keep an eye out for, describe some of the ISCBC programs, and share things you can do in your community. At this point, I'll pass the mic over to you, Nick. I hope you all enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for the warm welcome, Sue, and thanks to all of you for tuning in virtually, and welcome to Invasive Species 101 here. So just before we get stuck in, I'll just do a quick run through of what we're going to cover. So I'll just talk a little bit more about myself, do a quick icebreaker, introduce the council to those who aren't familiar, talk about some terminology, definitions, and characteristics, why invasives are a problem, some noteworthy ones, and how they affect some BC indigenous culture, discuss a couple of our programs, how you can help, and a couple of resources at the end. So, as Sue mentioned, I'm the Research and Projects Coordinator, and I'm a research marine ecologist. For my master's and PhD, I studied the population genetics and reproductive ecology of a couple of marine invasive invertebrates in New Zealand, the first being Stylochlava, which we've actually got here in Canada as well, and the Asian paddle crab, which invaded New Zealand from Japan. So just before we get started, I just also want to do a little icebreaker to kick us off here. So I hope you all like Jeopardy. And oh, look at that. I don't think it's a coincidence. There's only one category left, and it's native or invasive. So some pictorial clues will pop up here, and just throw it in the chat box if you think the species is a native one from here or an invasive one from away. So here's the first one. Yeah, a couple coming through. Native, definitely. Good call. So the Pacific dogwood, it's BC's official flower. Next. Nice. Yeah, a lot of invasives coming up there. So we're looking at Himalayan blackberry. It's invasive and it's everywhere. Basically, just because they're tasty, we often relocate them, and animals and birds move around the seeds. So it was introduced to BC around the 19th century as a berry crop, but it is on the BC Weed Control Act as a noxious weed. Nice. Seeing lots of the right answers coming through. So yeah, we're looking at arbutus. It's BC's only broadleaf evergreen tree. Yeah. How about this guy? I will touch on some definitions shortly after this. So native, yes, this is actually the red-eared slider, and it's kind of identified by this little red stripe along the ear. It's a pretty common outcome with these sliders is people often release their turtles when they don't want them anymore, or they get too large. They can live up to 30 years, these red-eared sliders, and they actually kind of became really popular with the rise of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So these guys compete with native turtles for food and space, and they can by other turtles in the pet trade and can transfer those onto native turtles. And they can also carry salmonella. How about this one? Yeah, a variety of answers coming through. Yeah, it's a bit of a trick question here. Not native to North America, but they have been introduced globally. But at least with many plants, they don't generally thrive without our help outside of our gardens and our greenhouses. So this is just an introduced naturalized species. Very good. So now we got that out of the way, I'll just speak about introduce the council here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the council, what we do, we are the largest provincial invasive species charity in Canada. And where we focus on is education, outreach, and training on invasive species. And we collaborate across Canada and often with our neighbors to the south. And we're a founding member and co-chair of the Canadian Council of Invasive Species. We're guided by a really diverse board of directors with a breadth of backgrounds and experience from a variety of different industries across all levels of government, from charities and NGOs, First Nations and environmental groups, et cetera, et cetera. And thanks, well, the management of invasive species in BC continues to improve thanks to the dedication and passion of hardworking independent regional invasive committees in BC. There's 13 of those, and other local governments and sort of other environmental stewardship groups. In specifics to the regional invasive species organizations, activities vary from on-the-ground management of invasive plants or species, community outreach or stewardship events, working with the public and the government and stakeholders to sort of achieve the unique missions and objectives of their regions. And so we often get to work closely with these committees to jointly deliver on a range of projects and special programs. Before we move on to the good stuff, I just want to circle back to some basics. I know some people in the chat box were asking about some sort of definitions here. Unfortunately, when it comes to invasive species, a lot of the terms and the acronyms used are used interchangeably. So we got things like non-native, invasive, feral, noxious, pest, exotic. And people use them interchangeably. And this goes from textbooks to legislation to municipal bylaws. So it's just important to be clear about those types of things and understand what they're describing. So for the ISCBC, we define a native species as one that naturally occurs in an area that has lived and evolved in a given place for a long time and is part of the natural environment. And they're also adapted to local conditions, and they've co-evolved with other species, predators, diseases, and climate factors. whereas a non-native or invasive species is introduced either intentionally or accidentally, usually by humans from geographically distant locations, and these can be desirable or undesirable. Thinking about these two species we've got in front of us here, in terms of unintentional release, American bullfrogs, which are a pretty voracious predator, have been introduced to parts of western BC through trout stalking. And purple loosestrife was accidentally introduced from Europe as seed in the 1800s. Thinking about these two species in an intentional introduction manner, the American bullfrog has been intentionally introduced into BC for food and to other places, and elsewhere for pest control. And similarly, purple loosestrife, after being introduced, was then promoted and sold as an ornamental plant and as a forage for beekeepers. So they can be intentional or unintentional. But as we touched on earlier, not all introduced species will definitely become invasive. Many plants, ornamental ones, and horticulture species won't survive outside gardens without our assistance. And then other species like brown trout we've got here, and the ring-necked pheasant from Eurasia are highly prized by anglers and hunters. So so they don't always become invasive. So now that we've got some of the terminology and the definitions out of the way, we can look at what types of traits can make a non-native species invasive. So there's a suite of characteristics that are pretty well conserved across groups of invasive species, across plants, animals, and insects. And firstly, I'm going to start with reproduction. Invasive species tend to be really efficient and prolific reproducers. So for instance, spotted knapweed is a plant which can produce over 140,000 seeds per year. Plants can also reproduce vegetatively, which means they could regrow simply from a fragment or a piece of the stem or the root, or some plants could even be self-fertile or hermaphroditic. Some animals like crabs can produce multiple broods or egg masses per year. They can store sperm for months at a time and for multiple mates. So they could potentially start a new population. And things like feral pigs, females can produce up to 2 litters per year, ranging from 10 to 12 piglets. So they tend to be really good at reproduction. They often have specialized characteristics to aid in dispersal and to facilitate spread. So for plants, they often have seeds that are adapted to disperse. So things like hound's tongue and burdock have burrs which adhere to clothing and to animal fur. Things like thistles have seeds with little parachutes that can become airborne in the wind. As I just mentioned, aquatic plants. Some things can grow vegetatively. A lot of aquatic plants can regrow from fragments or have seeds which float, which can make control very challenging. And animals and insects may have eggs, larvae, or life stages that are really highly mobile or easily dispersive, like things like mussels. Invasive species can often grow really quickly and reach reproductive maturity really quickly, and also are physiologically tolerant of a broader range of environmental factors like temperature or salinity or something like that. Asian carp, which are a big problem potentially for the Great Lakes, can tolerate lower water quality in terms of available oxygen and sort of a range in temperatures when you compare those to native fish species, perhaps like salmon. And then some plant species are incredibly tough. They can grow through asphalt or concrete or the foundations of homes, or can have seeds that can survive wildfires. And upon being relocated to new areas, invasive species often arrive free of the checks and balances that keep them at bay in native locations. So for instance, we've got orange hawkweed in parts of BC. And on the left here, this orange flower, and it basically crowds out native pasture forage, and it's not palatable meaning it's not tasty or grazed upon by wildlife or livestock. And we've also got a newish invader to BC, which is the Japanese beetle, which arrived here in the Vancouver area around 2017. But no one's found evidence of any critter or animal in BC that has discovered this beetle's tasty yet. So now that we understand a little bit more about some of the things that make a species invasive, how does this translate into some of the impacts that they have on the environment, economies, and human well-being? So they can have negative effects on agriculture and ranching activities by reducing crop quantity and quality. So they can do this by directly replacing the target crops, or they could grow interspersed amongst the profitable ones, tainting them with spines or toxic plants or things that are inedible, and some can even be poisonous to livestock. In terms of transportation, the costs accumulate having to remove invasive plants to reestablish important sightlines along roadways and highways. And invasive species can also affect property values. Insects like European fire ants, which are a human health risk, can make backyards and green spaces effectively unusable. Some, as I mentioned, some invasive plants are incredibly difficult to control and can physically damage your property. And there are even some pretty obscure things like the coqui frog in Hawaii. These little frogs, in their really large numbers, create loud and incessant calling from dusk till dawn, and they chirp at about 90 decibels, which is about as loud as a lawnmower or a garbage disposal. So in neighborhoods where this frog exists, people are struggling with the sounds. In 2014, the Canadian Food and Inspection Agency estimated that the annual impact of invasive species to Canada is around 30 billion per year, and you'd expect this value to be larger now in 2020. Of this 30 billion, it was estimated that there was about 2.2 billion in costs to manage invasive plants in the agricultural sector. Within the Great Lakes, about 7 billion. And in the forestry sector, we're looking about 20 billion for invasive plant management and costs. So it's quite substantial. Now, forget about all that money part. As a biologist, and I suspect that many of you here today also have a keen interest in protecting BC's biodiversity. As Sue mentioned at the get-go, like BC is Canada's most biodiverse province and territory, and I definitely think that's worth conserving. So invasive species can predate upon native ones. They can compete with them for food and space. They have the ability to alter ecosystems and ecosystem functions, can impact upon water quality and quantity, alter soil productivity, affect natural fire and flood regimes. They can also introduce diseases and parasites, and they can hybridize with native species if they're closely enough related, can dilute gene pools and introduce unfavorable mutations as well. And finally, invasives can have social and cultural impacts as well. Some pose some pretty nasty human health risks that can leave you in hospital. Some also reduce the recreational values and opportunities of things like beaches and the lakes and parks and golf courses and trails that we like to frequent. And many can also impact upon First Nations culture and activities as well. So some of you may have seen this before. This is the invasion curve, but looking at it more simply, it is time since introduction on the x-axis and cost on the y. So basically the ecologists or managers often break invasions into 4 steps: prevention, eradication, containment, and long-term management. But the takeaway message here is time post introduction, generally costs go up. So essentially, the most effective cost management option for invasive species is working in the prevention step way down here. So that's kind of where we do a lot of our work. Now we've got a better understanding of the characteristics of invasive species and why they're a problem, we can move into looking at a couple that are problematic around the province. So I'm going to start off with this Japanese beetle, since I spend so much of my time with this little bugger. So the beetle's actually been out east in North America in the Maritime since as early as the 1920s, but it's only been found in BC as of July 2017. So why do we care? It's a regulated pest in Canada and the US, and the adult beetles eat just about everything. Documented feeding on the above ground plant parts of over 300 host plants, and the beetle's larvae feed on the roots of turf and ornamental grasses. So a big part of my role in working with Japanese beetle and the ISC has been public education. So myself and some other colleagues have been going around the lower mainland over the last couple of years, familiarizing people with the beetle and its identity, so we can have invasive beetle detectives working across the province for us. So apart from being small, they are pretty conspicuous. The adult beetles are oval in shape and emerald green and about a centimeter long, and they've got these two bronzy wing covers called elytra. And the key identifying feature of this beetle is the 6 tufts of hair along the abdomen. That's nothing else is going to look like that on an insect in BC. So that's your dead giveaway. Like I mentioned, it eats just about everything, so it would not be ideal if it were to hitchhike its way to important fruit-growing regions of BC. It loves stone fruits, berries, wine grapes, and its favorite fruit is roses. So there has been an ongoing eradication program since 2018, and it will likely continue on for a couple more years now. If you actually see a substantial population, you'll see feeding damage like this. It's described as lace-like, and the beetles leave the veins of the leaves behind. And if it's significant enough, the tree can't photosynthesize of the plant, and it will eventually kill it. They're really good at getting into nooks and crannies, so these beetles can get into the roses, and you could accidentally transport flowers in that matter, beetles via flowers in that matter. And as I said, the larvae live in the turf, and they consume the roots of the grass. So if you walk around parts of Vancouver and you notice bits of lawn torn up, that's usually raccoons, crows, skunks trying to get the larvae of these beetles. So the ground will actually feel kind of spongy, and you can actually pull it up if you've got a beetle larvae problem. So they've got a really large egg, and they go through 3 larval stages. At its largest state, if you kind of stretch out this big guy, he's about, the larvae is about 3.5 millimeters in length, 3.2 to 3.5, centimeters. They got a pupa and the adult. So they have 1 generation per year in BC. The adults emerge from the soil kind of around late June and early July, when temperatures are around 21 degrees Celsius. And as soon as they emerge, they kind of get mating. Around the same time, after mating, the females deposit the eggs, around 60 eggs, 2 to 5 centimeters within the soil. And those eggs hatch in about 2 weeks. The larvae begin to feed on the roots of the grass throughout summer and fall, and as winter comes, they bury deeper into the soil so they avoid freezing. And as spring comes through, they keep growing, they pupate and emerge, and the whole thing starts all over again. So what is being done? So in addition to treating turfed areas around Vancouver, 90% of the beetles have been coming out of David Lamb Park, which are approximately here. So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, has set up movement restrictions to prevent the spread of the beetle. So we have to think back to the life cycle of the beetle. So this red area is the restricted area. Considering that The beetle larvae can be in the soil year-round. You are not allowed to move soil out of this red area out. You can get a permit. There's some different circumstances contacting CFIA, but generally speaking, that's the rule. And thinking about the beetles are out flying about when temperatures are over 21 degrees, so we equate that to being around mid-June to mid-October. The beetles could potentially be residing in the trees, in your above ground plant parts, so you're unable to remove above ground plant parts from this area between July 15th and October 15th. Any movement internally is fine, but you can't move them out just to avoid the risk of spreading it. For people living in this area, they were able to use their municipal green bins or take waste to a special station at 301 West 1st. And all the green waste material goes to a specific waste to energy facility in Burnaby, where it's burned and turned back into energy. And to figure out where the beetles are and if they're moving, CFIA has set these traps. They kind of resemble a bomb, all the way from Hope through the downtown core and to high-risk locations on the island, just to find out where they're going and where they are. So now moving on from Japanese beetle, we're on to another pretty nasty one, knotweeds. So knotweeds are native to Asia, and there's 4 species present in BC, and they were introduced as an ornamental plant, kind of like a privacy screen, just like bamboo. And they're one of the world's 100 worst invasive species. So we've got Japanese knotweed and giant knotweed in BC. Interestingly, the original introduction of Japanese knotweed into BC was a sterile clone, so theoretically it couldn't reproduce by seed. But if it were pollinated by a similar species, enter giant knotweed, it could hybridize and produce something else. So the other 2 species we have are Himalayan knotweed and Bohemian knotweed. So Bohemian knotweed is the cross between Japanese and giant knotweed, and they're about 80% of the infestations we have in the province. So why are they so awful? They're able to tolerate a wide range in soil types and climates, so they can survive virtually anywhere. They're really tough to eradicate, and they grow vegetatively, as I mentioned before. So if you try and remove this plant and happen to leave a small root fragment, it could regrow. And it's often along riparian areas, so along the borders of water bodies. So that causes some complications when you're trying to eradicate them. And it is also on the BC Provincial Noxious Weed List. We don't want to reach the pervasive status that it has in the UK. As I mentioned previously, knotweeds can grow through concrete and asphalt. They can damage infrastructure, and it's been estimated that the UK spends over $3 billion US a year to manage and repair due to this nasty plant. In the UK, residents are unable to secure mortgages or insurance on knotweed infested properties, and homeowners are actually suing their neighbors for not treating knotweed. So it's on the radar for real estate professionals in BC and that type of thing. So hopefully it doesn't reach that stage here. Another nasty plant that we've got around that is a threat to natural ecosystems and human health is giant hogweed, and it is also a provincially noxious weed on the BC Weed Control Act. The really bad thing about this one is the sap contained in the hairs and other parts of the plant is phototoxic. So what that means is if you get the sap on your skin and it's exposed to sunlight, it can result in really painful burns, blistering, and scarring that will last forever. So WorkSafe BC warns and states that you have to wear full PPE, which is personal protective equipment when managing any of these, when managing this nasty plant. hence the name giant. You can see in the image, these plants get pretty enormous. So 2019 was the year that giant Asian hornets entered our vocabulary and ruled some staff members' lives for about a month. So these are obviously native to Asia, and there were 2 reports of Asian hornets in BC in 2019. They're both really large hornets, upwards of 4.5 centimeters long, and the queens are even bigger, up to almost 6 centimeters long. And these guys are aggressive predators of social insects like honeybees and wasps and other hornets. The first incursion was Vespa soror, which is this guy down here. It was found in the port of Vancouver by an individual, and that person then brought it home to North Vancouver. If you do that, please do not bring it home. Report it right away, and try and collect it or smush it or put it in the freezer. The second detection we had in BC was of Vespa mandarina, and that was a nest out in Parksville on the island, and provincial bee experts quickly destroyed this nest. If you get onto YouTube and search Conrad Berube and Asian giant hornet, you can actually see the video of that, and it's really interesting. And the province would love reports. So if anyone thinks they see this hornet, please do report it to the province, or like it's been put in the chat box, you can use Report Invasives app. I'll speak a little bit to that at the end. Another insect that's in parts of BC is the European fire ant, which again is another human health risk and has emerged in parts of BC. It does prefer the moist lawns of the island and Vancouver area, but it also has been found in Chilliwack and Naramata. And unfortunately with these guys is you don't really know you have them until you step on the nest. They start swarming and sting you. For some people who may have allergies to venoms, this can cause anaphylaxis, and it can be pretty bad. So like I mentioned, that they don't create obvious nests, so they'll often nest along under sort of any derelict stuff you've got around the yard, along fence lines or trees or shrubs or under rocks. And this was originally brought into Vancouver via a garden center which had infested plants, potted plants. So there's something to be wary about when relocating plant material. And an entomologist, Dr. Rob Higgins at Thompson Rivers University, is the ant expert in BC, and he was doing a survey of homeowners in BC. But people were reluctant to tell them about ant issues because it could potentially impact upon their property values. So there are other ant species, fire ants, but the one that's the indicative giveaway for the European fire ant is this double segment in between the thorax and the abdomen. Yes, moving on. So there's a variety of other species. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but thought I'd just mention a handful more here. So butterfly bush. So this one is beautiful, and the pollinators love them, but it is bad if it escapes cultivation. Thankfully, you can actually get sterile clones of these ones. So keep an eye out for those guys. Scotch broom is a very competitive bushy plant that displaces natives and beneficial ones, causing loss of grasslands and even open forest, and it can also be a pretty bad fire load hazard. Himalayan balsam is a cool plant that I like to mention. It can grow about 2 meters tall, and it grows really quick. And it grows especially along river banks and wetland areas. The really neat thing about this plant is the way it disperses its seeds. So if you sort of accidentally nudge it or knock it, it can explosively eject its seeds upwards of 7 meters away from its parent plant, which is pretty incredible. If you live in the lower mainland, you may definitely know about the European chafer beetle, sort of similar to the Japanese beetle. Their larvae consume, again, the roots of grasses and destroy your lawn. So that's the majority of issues for people with crows and things pulling up their turf. But the main difference is the adult beetle, they don't feed. Parrot's feather is an aquarium garden pond release issue, and it's known to outcompete and replace native aquatic vegetation, and it grows in really dense monospecific stands and creates these mats, and in turn it creates pools of stagnant water, which can lead to increases in mosquito breeding grounds. Ecosystem effects. And there's always seems to be reports of goldfish infested lakes. It seems pretty commonplace. And these guys simply just grow and reproduce like aquatic bunnies. Invasive species also threaten the plants and the wildlife that indigenous communities have long relied upon in BC. And especially they can impact culturally important species to First Nations. For instance, sage and sweetgrass are considered important medicinal plants for interior cultures and are harvested and used for smudging ceremonies. And these harvesting grounds of these plants are often threatened by the overtake of invasive species like skeleton rushweed and things like knapweeds. There's a variety of knapweed species in BC, brown, meadow, Russian, diffuse, and spotted knapweed. And a variety of them were introduced here by contaminated crop seeds. So they're great competitors with native plants. They completely degrade habitats and can take over large amounts of space. As I mentioned earlier, they produce loads of seeds, and they can also affect other seeds via allelopathy. So some plants can produce biochemicals which influence soil properties, and they can either inhibit the growth or promote the germination of other plants in immediate areas. Cedar is an extremely important tree to many indigenous cultures in the coast, and it's a sacred species used for carving, weaving, and cleansing. One invasive that impacts upon that is English ivy, and it's a pretty common invasive plant globally. You can find it just about in any neighborhood, really. And it's really problematic when it escapes cultivation. If it grows over your fence of your backyard into a park, or someone throws their unwanted hanging basket, when it escapes, it can quickly spread into neighboring areas. So it has two distinctive growth stages, a juvenile stage which grows along the ground, and an arborescent or tree-like stage where it starts to crawl up trees and that type of thing. So it grows really dense monocultures that can basically smother and inhibit the growth and regeneration of other plants. And the mere added weight of English ivy can pull down trees. There's also a great importance placed on moose, especially in remote communities throughout BC, and caribou are still relied upon in the northern communities. And in many of these places where groceries are expensive and often a bit of a mission to get, harvesting meat is an important part of these communities. So infestations of species like oxeye daisy and burdock and Dalmatian toadflax, they can limit grazing areas for moose and caribou because they're unpalatable, and they can also just physically make harvesting meat more difficult and getting into some of these places. Supalolly or soapberry is another important berry throughout BC. It's full of nutrients, and it's whisked up with sugar to make a foamy sort of ice cream, and it's a favorite and can often be found at powwows. So it's been decreasing in availability in some areas, and it's affecting harvesting. And so it can basically be crowded out by any really dense growing invasive, like some of the two I've already mentioned, Himalayan blackberry and Scotch broom, for example. So now I'm just going to touch on a handful of our programs here. Don't want to spend. So the Grow Me Instead program, Plantwise. The horticulture industry is identified as a key pathway for the introduction and spread of horticulturally invasive plants within our gardens, orchards, vineyards, hayfields, crops, croplands, etc. And so PlantWise is a province-wide program with a voluntary code of conduct which was designed to work with the industry and retailers and home gardeners to phase out both the sale and the demand for non-native plants. So as it's been mentioned, the Grow Me Instead booklet in the chat box here gives a great list of some of the invasive plants still being sold and options in your growing region for native species. So yeah, please do check out beplantwise.ca. Clean, drain, dry. The goal is really simple. It's to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species to BC waters. So what does that mean? Clean off all plant parts, animals, and mud from your boat and your gear. Boat goes for all types of boats. Your fishing boat, your luxury yacht, your kayak, your canoe, your stand-up paddleboard. Drain all the water from your boat and gear onto land. This includes all your internal compartments like bilges and bait buckets, wells, and pull all the plugs. And finally, dry all the parts of your boat and gear completely before moving. So one of the major couple species trying to keep out of the western provinces are zebra and quagga mussels. So I'm sure many of you have heard of them, but they're excellent competitors and really good filter feeders and basically remove all of the planktonic food from the water column. They're also problematic for hydropower generation and water treatment because they physically stick to everything at really high densities, and it's pretty costly to remove them. And they also have some social aspects. They really stink when they decompose, and they have really sharp shells that litter the beaches. Diving ducks eat zebra mussels, but unfortunately, because they're filter feeders, they often filter out a lot of the nasty things in the water column. So that ends up sort of moving down the food chain. So that's not a good thing either. If zebra and quagga mussels were to establish in BC, costs of hydropower and irrigation and municipal water supplies and recreational boating costs would be estimated around $43 million per year. But there are also other associated costs not included within that. So clean, drain, dry also applies to other species and plants, not just these mussels. Some of these plants have floating seed parts which can regrow, or fragments that can get stuck on your trailer, or so. Yeah, the zebra and quagga mussels are not in BC yet. They're about as far west as Lake Winnipeg, so there's a lot going on. So please clean, drain, dry. Thinking back to the red ear slider and some of the goldfish, some of BC's serious invaders have come from the intentional or improper disposal of aquariums and terrariums into our waters and environment. So thinking about it, it's not very fair on us to release a domesticated pet into the wild, and you can actually be charged for that or even face jail time. So we have the Don't Let It Loose program, where we try and work with cooperative pet stores and pet owners and encourage people not to dump their unwanted pets. So what could you do instead? You could contact the retailer to see if they would take back the animal. You could contact science centers, zoos, or aquariums to see if they could use them for educational purposes. Consider humane euthanasia by a veterinarian. And if it's an aquatic plant, you could dry it, freeze it, and put them in the non-composted trash. We've also got Clean, Drain, Dry, which is a focus on outdoor recreation to stop the spread of terrestrial species. So for instance, if you're out for a hike, make sure you clean the seeds out of your boots, boot treads, pull the burrs off your dog, and make sure there's no puncture vine in your mountain bike tires. And moving firewood can also spread invasive species and diseases that can severely impact our environment and our economy. Another campaign we're part of is Buy Local, Burn Local, where we encourage you to burn your firewood where you buy it. Pests around have been transported via fire would have caused some real havoc back east in Canada and other parts of the States. We've got none of these species established in BC, the Asian longhorn beetle, emerald ash borer, or the gypsy moth. But we have had infestations of gypsy moths, which have undergone eradications. Sorry. So what can you do to help? Some final steps and considerations. If it doesn't look like it belongs in your neighborhood or your park or green space, there's no harm in reporting it. And like they said, there's lots of ways. And COVID-19 is going to change a lot about how we go about our everyday lives. But when the time comes, get out there, volunteer your time, take some ownership of your local green spaces, and even come volunteer with us. So these days there's all types of apps out there, and I would encourage you to use them. But we have the Report Invasive mobile app for iPhone and Android, which are really user-friendly. And all you do is simply take a picture, it pulls the GPS coordinates, and it sends the records through to the province to be confirmed, and then we'll move on from there. You could also report it to us via our phone line, via email at info@bcinvasives, or you can report to your local invasive species organization or local government. Just a handful of resources here. So if you visit our map, visit our website, you can find our regional invasive species organizations map with contact details there. And you can visit our resources page where we have field guides to noxious weeds and other plants, many specific species, fact sheets with distribution, biological information, and management information, best practices guides, webinars. We have online training, heaps of options to keep learning. You can sign up for our newsletters, and you can even become a member. There's a variety of benefits, so visit our website, check those out. And fortunately, with the Clean Drain Dry program we're running, we have the lucky opportunity to produce some public service announcements to air live on TV and on social media. So we're looking for some passionate voices from BC's youth to help raise awareness on aquatic invasive species in particular. So we're looking for ambassadors. So if you are between the ages of 7 and 14, or you know someone who could be interested, we ask to submit a short video with their answers to the following questions: who you are and where you're from, what your favorite lakes, rivers, and other water bodies in BC are your favorite, what are your favorite things to do, why are they important to you, and what do you do to make sure they stay clean and healthy. So if you're interested, please send submissions to Peter at mastermindstudios.ca with ISCBC video submissions in the subject line. And finally, just also like to mention to keep an eye out for the ISCBC's Virtual Youth Summit, which is being organized for May 1st and May 2nd. And yeah, that's about it for me. Are there any questions? Well, I saw there are loads of questions in the box.
Questions. Thanks, Nick. Thanks so much for that great presentation. And thanks to everybody. There's been lots of good chat in the chat box too, which is awesome. I'm going to go through the question list. And thanks to Brittany for putting the links to a lot of the programs that Nick has been talking about in the chat box as well. So we'll go through the questions. As I say, we've got about 10, 11 minutes, so hopefully we'll get through lots of them. So Ksenia is asking if birds eat Himalayan blackberry.
For sure, yes. That's kind of whenever you have opportunity, when I have opportunities to talk to people out and about, the birders love the Himalayan blackberry because they bring all sorts of neat life to take pictures of. So they do, and birds definitely disperse the seeds and help spread Himalayan blackberry around. All
right. Natasha's asking, how do you define naturalized and what are the parameters? That's a good question.
Oh, how could I? They a species would sort of become part of the natural environment without taking over, like an invasive species would. That's probably not the best way to explain it.
I'm trying to think of an example too.
Yeah.
It's a tricky question, and I think as biologists, that's something that a lot of people debate too. What is naturalized? What is non-native? What is invasive? But I think that's pretty close, Nick. We can look up a more specific definition for you, Natasha, and send it to you as well. All right, let's go to the next question from Adian. Have there been any strides to use non-chemical treatments on knotweed species such as root wave? And I think root wave is that electroshocking mechanism.
Yeah, I know that is being employed by a company in the Vancouver area, I believe. So it uses an electric current. But yeah, I think innovate White Star. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, opportunities out there for innovation, since you can apply pesticides within buffer zones within riparian areas near water, which knotweed species often are. So it is struggle. It is a struggle. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think we're still waiting for some data to come in on that technology. There's been some issues with what happens to the microorganisms in the soil after electric shocks are applied. But it's great to see some innovations happening along those lines. Thanks for the question. So Natasha's saying, is there anything in place to stop stores from selling invasives like bamboos, the knotweeds, and nandina, which is poisonous to birds? And I think, Nick, you've addressed the Plant-Wise Grow Me Instead program, which is a great program for finding alternatives to invasive plants. That if you like something blue and dangly like butterfly bush, plant these 3 things. And also, we're trying to get a lot of the nurseries to actually be certified as Plant-Wise nurseries. So take a look at that program. It's a great program and has some great options in it too. Nicole's asking, how are you educating the public about the beetle, Japanese beetle, information booths?
Yeah, over the last couple of years, we've used all sorts of different means, setting up booths at Science World, visiting community gardens, set up a booth at Jazz Fest. So social media. So yeah, we're trying to get it out there in multiple ways. Thankfully, last year, 2019, there was an 86% reduction in beetles compared to 2018. So it seems to be going well, and there haven't been any. There hasn't been any spread, which is good.
Yeah, we were lucky to have a couple of staff hired as Japanese beetle ambassadors that did a lot of outreach and presentations too. Diane's asking if there are any predators for the beetle larva.
Yes. As you probably see around, crows will be trying to pick at them. Raccoons, skunks. Off the top of my head, those are the main sort of local things that could get after the larvae.
Yeah, similar to what goes after chafer beetles, and digs up your lawn. All right. Amanda says, does a Japanese beetle impact native vegetation, or is it limited to impacts on agricultural species?
It's a generalist consumer. So unless there's something biochemically in there that they don't like, they'll pretty much have a go at just about anything.
Yeah, there you go. And Ksenia wants to know if Japanese beetles eat invasive plants.
They probably do.
Yeah, probably. We'll have to watch for that.
Yeah.
Eileen's asking, are there red ants other than fire ants?
I believe so. They're not necessary. Like fire ants separate from red ants. I believe so. Yes.
I believe
But
there are too.
Yes.
Yeah, so the color isn't the best way to judge, that's for sure. So Charlotte is asking a good question, and this happened last year. We had a lot of debate about this, about the vehicles used when fighting fires and the spread of invasive species. Should they be looking at wash stations?
Well, I know when you have a big development project, for instance, there'll be a truck washing site to wash any incoming and outgoing trucks. So theoretically, that is an option during the spread of firefighting. But the invasive species is a whole world of prioritization, and at that stage, fighting fires is probably higher up the priority ladder. So I'm not sure if that would get a look in, but who's to say? Yeah.
And I think they have looked at that, Charlotte, especially in the Williams Lake, the Caribou area. Not so much maybe with the firefighting vehicles, but with the people coming in later. Good question. So Wade's wondering about the status of sargassum. There are some people here that say it has been here for a while, so it's almost an expected species. That's a good question. Sargassum being a seaweed.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it has been around for a while, and yeah. But yeah, in regards to the status, I'm not too sure. With an aquatic interest myself, I haven't really come across too much information on it, but it is here. Yes, Wade, you're totally right.
All right. And Natasha says that she's on Vancouver Island, as am I. Are there any invasion by garlic mustard there? DSV, I'm not sure what that is, and Phragmites. These are the devils in Carolinian Canada, isn't it true?
DSV.
I'm not sure what DSV is. Maybe Diane, Natasha, you can text us that.
There you go.
Dog penguin vine. There you go. I'm not sure. Do you know that, Nick?
I've heard of it, but it's...
As far as I know, Natasha, being an islander, there's not... these things haven't hit the radar yet. They may be around, but we can check back with that. I've seen them in Ontario, especially the Phragmites, and they are just a huge nightmare. So let's keep our fingers crossed they stay off the island. Tracy's asking about yellow iris. That's a good question.
I would say so. Yeah. I think most communities, well, I can't say that. I can't say most communities, but yes, I think it is a problem in select places. It's, again, that can spread vegetatively. So if you miss a piece of it and it floats downriver, it can grow again. So.
And it's yellow iris. There are yellow irises that are not invasive, but yellow flag iris, the one that only pure yellow iris, is the one that's invasive. And it is everywhere in BC, which is a scary thing. All right, how are we doing here? We got about 1 more minute. Diane's asking about knotweed, and she's been handpicking it with local neighborhood health. Wow. Chances of success. Boy, oh boy, it's a huge job, and I haven't heard great chances of success with picking knotweed, but 5 years, that's awesome. Nick, any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, unfortunately. I would talk to your local government or your RISO maybe about actioning on your local patch.
It sounds like you're working with MOTI, the Ministry of Transportation, which is great. But what I know about knotweed is the massive infrastructures and picking it, as you know, probably the little tiny pieces can grow a new plant. So you have to be really careful with the stuff that you pick. Looking at the time, it's 1 o'clock. Let's take another question or two because I don't want to keep people too long. Irene says, how long does it take to get a species on the list? And are there regional lists? She's thinking about small yellow balsam, which has flourished in the lower mainland in recent years.
In my limited experience in sort of working with some local governments, it is kind of tough to get species added to the Weed Control Act. It may be a chat you'd want to have with your local government and sort of weed control office, your bylaw related things, but it is very difficult to get it on the list. It kind of has to be a priority for sort of multiple regions.
Mm-hmm. And Irene, there is definitely regional lists. If you look, actually,
yes.
Often your regional district will have a list up on their website. And if not, the regional invasive species organizations all have their priority lists on their website. So check our website to find the one nearest you, because we have a map you can click on, and then you can find that out. All right, let's try one more question, Nick.
Sure.
One's coming up. Unless that was the last one. It might have been the last question.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because Tracy was asking about how to report yellow flag iris, and I see that Brittany's sent her the link. Yes, please, and report it using the Report Invasives app. Report Invasives app is a great field guide as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, folks, I'm going to end it there, but thanks so much for joining us today, and thank again, Nick, for sharing your expertise with us today on behalf of the Invasive Species Council and for everybody that joined us today. We're going to send up a short link to an evaluation survey to all participants, and we'd love it if you filled it out. We can get your feedback and some ideas for future webinars. Next month, we have a great webinar coming up. It's called Grass Gone Bad, New Invasive Species of Concern to BC's Grasslands, and it's going to be on the 22nd of April, and it'll be presented by Becky Brown, who's a well-known invasive plant expert with the BC Ministry. So thanks, folks. Check the ISC website for more information on upcoming webinars and to register, and thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.